How's it going, everybody? LandO and Studyy here, and today we are previewing the bottom 4 teams right now in the Call of Duty League.
Only the top 8 teams make it to champs in Los Angeles, and no one is out of the running.
Going into the Major 4 qualifiers, the 4 teams outside of the top 8 are the Paris Legion, the New York Subliners, the Florida Mutineers, and the Minnesota ROKKR. Yes, you heard me right. Paris still do have a shot.
LA Thieves are the current gatekeepers at the 8th spot, and they have a big red target on their back.
Now it's going to be a very scrappy fight as these teams claw their way up the ladder, and we cannot wait to end the regular season with a photo finish. With Major 4 around the corner, it is the last chance for champs.
First, let's talk CDL points. The maximum amount of points a team can earn in qualifying matches and in a major is 115. 50 points for the qualifying matches and 65 from winning the major. Of the bottom 4 teams, New York, Florida, and Minnesota cannot be eliminated during qualifying matches, but their qualifier performance will lighten up the pressure going into LAN. For Paris, well, we'll get to that.
The first team we talk about is the bottom team in the CDL rankings, the Paris Legion. Paris has the most difficult scenario to get to champs. Currently sitting 100 points behind 8th place. To get into the top 8, they need to go 5-0 in qualifiers, win Major 4, and hope that out of the 6 teams ahead of them in the rankings, 3 don't get 140 points before Major 4. And in the words of NASA, failure is not an option. Now, Jay, the very first 2 matches that the Paris Legion are going to have are going to be versus Seattle and Optic Texas. Not easy games by any means. What does the road look like? Where does this start from, this heroic miracle type run? Where does it start for the Legion?
Well, it all starts with them finding Jesus, because this is going to be a difficult task to get done.
Okay.
Like you said, they're going up against a team like Seattle, or just coming off of that most recent major win. They're looking in prime form going towards the end of the year. And then Optic Texas, they're still one of the top 3 teams in the game. I just do not see a way Paris Legion can try to go undefeated in qualifying matches by trying to get through both of these powerhouse teams.
Yeah, and that's just to start it off as well. And like the one thing too that we've talked about, I mean, so often with the Paris roster is the inconsistencies in the roles. Like how many times have you and I, or whether just watched games happen where it's the temp and it's the gravity show and the SMGs start to fall behind? I feel like, I don't know, like maybe a change in the SMGs at least gives this team some fire if that final major, for example, is the last event of the season for them.
I think it definitely does, man. If you look at the stats that both of their ARs been putting up, I'm pretty sure Temp overall is like 3rd overall throughout the year when it comes to just stats that he's putting up, most consistent player on that Paris Legion roster. And then Tom Gravity, the main AR player for that team, he's also been putting up some really consistent numbers. So the main attack has to be those SMGs. They're both sitting at basically like 50 to 56 in the bottom of the league currently on stats overall KD. They just haven't been performing. So I think if you want to try to find some success for Paris Legion, it definitely starts with the SMGs. At least in my mind, when you're playing Vanguard, the way you're going to see a lot of success comes to your SMG players. Next up, sitting at 11th is the New York Subliners. They are 50 points behind the 8th seed with decent qualifying performances, but 0 wins at any major this year. Unfortunately, winning the 2022 Pro-Am doesn't help with CDL points. The Subliners are hosting the final major of the year in New York City, so they're hoping that home field gives them some extra juice, like it did for Optic and Toronto.
Okay, Jay, I know this one hits you. You know, it's a sore spot. It's your New York Subliners. I mean, the conversations are there at Major 3. They don't win a single match. I mean, when it comes down to major LAN performances, does it change? Like, does it change if they make their way through what would be a heroic run in the qualifiers? Do you think they have what it takes in their own home environment for Major 4?
I think they definitely have what it takes to go out there and put on an absolute show at Major 4 with their home advantage, having all the fans right behind them. But the biggest thing for me has to be their consistency and hardpoint. We watched them online. They're going 7-2 throughout the last stage, which is tied for the best record for overall hardpoint performance out of every single team. But then they transition over to LAN, and that's where they usually do not see success. You see Hydra and Kismet taking over maps online. They're both putting up insane stats. And then on the opposite, when you get to LAN, they kind of slow down. Their ARs as well. Crim and Paulex are dominant online, both sitting over 1.0 KDs, but when they get to LAN, they just slack off. And when you see that happen, it happened at Major 3, it happened in every single major this year. They find themselves down 0-1 in the series when they're losing that hard point. Then they have to rely on search and destroy, which hasn't been their strong suit all year long.
I don't know about you, and I know obviously being a New York fan yourself, like I know your spotlight is going to be on the Subliners. But it does feel like the bottom 4 teams right now, the biggest spotlight is on this team, you know, given the fact of the players that have been on this team, like Crimsix specifically. We talk about him and Champs, etc. But what do you think is the single most important thing for New York to make this run? If it's going to happen, right? If they are somehow able to make top 8, which would be unbelievable, if they're able to do it, what do you think it would come down to most?
I think it just definitely comes down to team morale and their chemistry between each other, because you have the SMGs who are doing everything correct online, but then when they get to land, something is off with the pacing. They're playing a little too slow in situations, playing a little bit too fast. We saw them multiple times, even in the search and destroy, where they're getting 4v2 clutched on, 3v2 clutched on, in-man advantages. And when you have a team of that caliber of players, like you said, Crimsix, who's been to multiple different world championships, already has 3 rings. He's quote-unquote the GOAT of Call of Duty. You have a high expectation for this roster. They just have to figure out consistency when they get to that major.
And as you said, Crimsix, 3 world championships. He's been to every single COD champs. What would it say if Crim, and more specifically New York, doesn't make it to champs? We'll find out. Next, sitting at number 10 is the Florida Mutineers. During qualifiers, they've been strangely consistent, going 2 and 3 in every qualifier stage. 50 of their 110 points have come from surprise performances in Majors 2 and 3, beating Optic in both events. Despite having only 9 wins, these upsets at Majors have saved their season so far, keeping them within 10 points of the number 8 seed. Mutineers also have the easiest qualifier schedule amongst the bottom 4 teams, so the weather forecast is looking pretty good right now for Florida. And that is always the case, Jay. It feels like with this Florida Mutineers team is that you never really know what to expect. It almost feels like the most Florida thing ever would be like, hey, we got a great schedule, and they somehow fall short. Now, I have been very much so in the Florida camp at times, buddy, of being like, okay, this is their chance to really show out. Feels like I'm always off. I don't know how you feel about the Florida team right now. I know they've got a great chance of potentially breaking into that top 8, but it just feels like you never know what Mutineers team that you're going to get.
Yeah, the biggest thing that stands out for me for Florida is that when we watch them on land, they're pretty good at every single respawn map. The thing that throws me off is just their dynamic of their team. Sometimes they find themselves playing a little bit too slow, and sometimes a little bit too fast. A majority of the time, though, it's definitely slow. And you can see that they struggle on maps like Bocage and maps like Tuscan, unless Awakening is dropping like 40-something kills. The guy's an absolute beast, but you need to develop at least a better play style, or at least better pacing between your teams so you're always on the same page. That's the thing for me. If they can get on the same page, that's when we see Florida at their highest. But then what we saw from them at Major 3, in that match versus Optic, they go out there and they take over. Skies and Awakening, they dominate. But then in the match versus Seattle, they kind of lack off. And the biggest thing has to be search and destroy. They have a bunch of phenomenal players when it comes to the respawn. But if they can get their search and destroy on point, that team is definitely championship ready.
And that's what it feels like for so many teams right now in the CDL. It's just a matter of like, okay, the respawns are looking good. We got control under wraps. We got a hard point under wraps. It's just a matter of mastering that search destroy when it comes down to the big boy at the end of the season. Do you feel like this is the time for a team like Florida to make a move? Coming into Major 4, the last dash, is it a good idea to mess up the chemistry right now? Or do you think that may be the one thing that gets them over the hump?
In my opinion, I think it's not a right move. I don't think it's the right move for Florida to make this roster change at the very last major of the year and then the only tournament going into champs right before that. I feel like since you started it off with this roster from the beginning, if you would have made a change, it should have been throughout stage 2 or even through the middle of stage 3. But when you wait too late, going into stage 4, which is only going to be your last qualifying matches, this is where it kind of gets difficult. Do you want to hit that reset button and get a whole new game plan, get someone to fill in, or at least try to make him comfortable in that game plan that you currently have? It's going to be a lot to deal with. I feel like Florida, it wouldn't be the right move. Lastly, at number 9, we have the Minnesota ROKKR. They are only 10 points behind LA Thieves at number 8. Currently, Minnesota have a game win percentage of 50.6%. which is the 5th highest in the league. Going 5-0 in Major 3 qualifiers put the ROKKR back in the race for champs. But with only 2 wins at Majors this year, the ROKKR need to translate their momentum into LAN wins. With qualifying matches versus Optic and Seattle, Minnesota's path to top 8 will not be easy.
And the one positive, I guess, if you are thinking about the Minnesota ROKKR, Jay, is that, hey, at least the online atmosphere seems to fit them quite well. We know at the Major 3 qualifiers, they look absolutely impeccable. Now going to be back in the online atmosphere. I want to ask you, like, I know with the recent shortcomings at the most recent major is obviously on the mind of everybody, but what really is the biggest difference in the Minnesota that we saw to start off the season to where Minnesota sits right now with a very good chance of getting in to the top 8?
Well, watching Minnesota in the beginning of the season, obviously they had a different roster. Major Maniac was still on his team. So talking about that team, it was just all about pacing. Everything was off. Certain situations, they would be fast, they'd be slow, and eventually it'd cost them and bite them in the end towards the very end of the game. And then when they made this roster change to pick up Havoc for Major Maniac, you can just see the difference that it did for this team. The pacing is insane. Now you have both of the SMGs who are clicking on every single cylinder. We even watched them in Search and Destroy pushing out cuts, two-man army just across the map, playing super confident. Like, that's the thing for me, is it's like when they're going towards land, even though a lot of people say you need to make sure that we weren't doing what we did in practice to what we're doing on land, that's just not us. But for me, it's all about confidence. When you have such young SMG players who just want to go out there and challenge every single gunfight, just let them fly, and that's where they see a lot of success.
Yeah, man, and I feel like when we talk about pace, a lot of times it comes down to the communication, and one thing that people don't always think about with the Minnesota roster is that all 4 of these guys have been in SMG at some point in their career. Yeah. So when we talk about, you know, the Standy and Havoc combo, it's great that the entire team is aware of what needs to be done. And kind of on topic with that, Jay, what do you think needs to be done right now for Minnesota to finally translate this success? If they're going to have that same, you know, solid performance in the online atmosphere, what do they need to do differently to perform better when it comes down to the stage at Major 4, and if they can get the champs?
The biggest thing for me that stands out when I'm talking about Minnesota, for them improving their game going into towards the later half of this year, towards the final stage of this year, it has to be just making their kills count, especially in the respawns. I feel like they're doing a lot of just going out there, getting a majority of these gunfights, getting a lot of engagements, but they're not really making real usage of their kills. They're winning a majority of these hard points, probably like 250 to 230, when they're out slaying teams by like 20-something kills. If they can figure out the way to properly play the hard point, or even play the control point, by picking up those kills and using their kills to their advantage to play it properly, I think that's when Minnesota will hit that next level. Alright, that's our bottom 4 teams in the CDL. But if this season has shown us anything, anyone can rise up and take the major by storm.
Performance at Major 4 in New York will be the biggest factor for the top 8. But qualifier matches are where teams get sharp and find their footing in the last chance for champs.
Keep sending your energy to your favorite teams, because the top 8 can get real mixy towards the end of the season.
Alrighty, friends, we are signing off. We'll see you guys all on the broadcast. And as always, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and keep up to date on all of the CDL news. Catch you later.